January 20th, 1942. 3 for 17 m. East of Formosa, in the black water of the Philippine Sea. The merchantman wallows in a winter swell, her bow lifting and falling with a wet creak that runs through the hull like a groan. She is a Maru, painted a dull gray now, her name still faintly visible beneath hurried wartime paint. Her decks are stacked with crates of rice, drums of aviation fuel, sacks of flour, and spare parts wrapped in oily canvas. Everything that keeps an empire moving is packed into her ribs. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Sato Hiroshi grips the rail until his knuckles whiten. The air stings. Salt coats his lips. A dim hooded lantern paints the glass in a sickly green, just enough to see the compass card trembling with each roll. Off the port bow, an escorting destroyer cuts a pale wake, a dark knife that seems comforting until you realize how small it is compared to the sea around them. A few more shadows follow behind, other cargo ships keeping station in a loose column, lights extinguished, funnels coughing smoke that dissolves into low cloud. It should feel safe. The battleships are far away. The big guns, the proud steel. The admirals talk about decisive engagements and lines of battle, about the day their heavy ships will smash the American fleet in a single thunderclap. But Sato cannot stop thinking about what he cannot see. The lookout on the starboard wing shouts, voice cracking as it cuts through the wind. A white streak, a brief flash of foam, like a finger drawn across the ocean surface. For half a second, the bridge crew does not understand what the eye is seeing. Then the word hits them like a slap. Torpedo. Sato turns, lungs tightening, and the world seems to slow. You can almost feel the seconds stretching, like rope under strain. Men point. Someone reaches for the alarm bell. The helmsman looks to Sato for permission, hands already twitching on the wheel. Hard to starboard, Sato roars. The Maru begins to turn, heavy and reluctant, her cargo shifting with a low internal thump. She is not a destroyer. She is a floating warehouse. Her stern drags through the sea as if it is glued to the darkness. The torpedo does not care. A dull, crushing impact blooms beneath the waterline. Not a clean bang, but a deep, blunt punch. The deck jolts up. The lantern swings wildly. Glass shatters somewhere. For a heartbeat, there is silence, the kind that happens when the body refuses to believe what it has just felt. Then the ship screams, metal tears. Steam bursts. A column of black water and orange fire erupts amidships and collapses back onto the deck in a boiling sheet. Men are thrown like dolls. A hatch cover flips end over end, vanishing into the night. The smell arrives instantly. Hot oil, burning paint, wet cordite, and something worse. The sharp chemical bite of ruptured fuel drums. Sato stumbles, catches himself, and sees the wake again. Another pale line racing toward them. The enemy submarine is out there, hidden below the swells, firing from the dark like an assassin. No masthead silhouette, no muzzle flash, no honorable exchange of salvos, just death in the water. The destroyer's siren wails. A searchlight snaps on, stabbing the sea, sweeping, searching for a periscope that might already be gone. Depth charge racks clatter. The escort turns hard, screws churning phosphorescence, and begins a tight hunting circle. But the Maru is already losing the fight. Her list grows with every breath. Below, sailors and civilian crewmen scramble through smoke and steam, hands slipping on ladders slick with seawater. Someone is praying. Someone is screaming for a friend trapped behind a jammed door. A petty officer tries to organize a bucket brigade that will never be enough. Fire licks along spilled fuel like a living thing. On the bridge, Sato forces himself to look aft. The convoy is breaking apart, ships turning away in panic, each one suddenly aware that the ocean under them is not empty. It is occupied. And in Tokyo, in rooms that smell of ink, tobacco, and damp wool uniforms. Admirals will read the report later and feel a different kind of chill. Not the cold of sea wind, but the cold realization that the war is not only decided by fleets and flags. It is decided by supplies, by rice and fuel, by the merchant hulls that keep the Navy alive. Battleships can burn a horizon. Submarines can starve a nation. Sato watches the destroyer drop its first pattern of depth charges. The explosions thump through the water like distant drums. The sea boils and heaves, but the enemy remains unseen. The Maru's bow dips lower. In the dark, the most frightening weapon is the one you cannot point at. The bow keeps sinking. Slow at first, then with the sickening certainty of a man kneeling before an executioner. Water climbs the foredeck in sheets, dragging loose cargo toward the scuppers. The ship's list deepens until the horizon tilts like a drunken line. Lieutenant Commander Sato does not shout anymore. There is no point. The men are already moving on instinct, hands tearing at lashings, boots slipping on wet planks, faces ghost-lit by firelight and the occasional sweep of a search lamp. A lifeboat is swung out too late, jammed by the sudden angle. Another boat smashes against the side, splintering while the ocean below seems to open its mouth. The destroyer circles, fast and furious, dropping another pattern of depth charges. Each detonation sends a hollow thump through the Maru's ribs. The escort's crew are fighting a duel in the dark, firing at an enemy that is mostly imagination. The ocean gives them no target, only the indifferent rise and fall of swells. Then a new sound cuts through everything, a long, tearing groan of metal, as if the ship herself is pleading. The Maru begins to break. Sato grabs the bridge wing rail and stares down at the sea. He wants to see the periscope, to hate something visible. He gets only black water and scattered debris. Somewhere out there, the American boat will be slipping away at depth. Electric motors whispering. Captain and crew steady as surgeons after the cut. That is what makes it worse. A battleship's attack announces itself. You see the muzzle flash. You hear the thunder. You have the dignity of knowing where death is coming from. This death arrives like a hand from below. Minutes later, when Sato is hauled into a life raft with a half-dozen men, he turns to watch the Maru's stern rise, propeller glinting briefly in the lantern light, then slide under with a gurgling rush. The convoy is gone. The destroyer is still hunting, and the shipping lane that once felt like a road now feels like a trap. 2 weeks later, in a quiet office inside the Naval Ministry in Tokyo, the report lands on a desk with a soft, papery slap. The paper smells of damp sea air and cheap ink. It is stamped with dates, coordinates, tonnage, cargo estimates. A clerk in wire-rimmed glasses reads it twice, then places it into a folder already fat with similar pages. The folder is labeled in neat characters, "Submarine Losses." An assistant carries that folder through corridors where officers in dark blue uniforms move like shadows. The building itself is calm, the kind of calm that belongs to institutions that pretend control. But as the folder changes hands, the calm begins to crack. A vice admiral pauses over the numbers, frowning. Not because a single Maru has gone down. Ships sink in war. It is the pattern that tightens his chest. The attacks are not concentrated on the fleet. They are concentrated on the arteries. He remembers the war games, the lectures, the pride of battle lines. He remembers the great ships, Yamato and Musashi, in the minds of planners even before their keels are fully understood by the public. Steel mountains meant to decide destiny in an afternoon of thunder. But the report does not speak of afternoons. It speaks of weeks and months. It speaks of cargo, fuel, food. It speaks of ships that do not appear in propaganda posters. It speaks of strangulation. The vice admiral leans back, the chair creaking. A faint smell of coal smoke drifts in from the street outside. Tokyo's winter air is cold and dry, and the city still believes. in early 1942 that victory is a matter of boldness, that the enemy will come. Be lured, be destroyed. The Americans, however, are doing something else, far out in the Pacific, in waters that stretch for thousands of miles. American submarines are sliding beneath convoys like wolves under a herd. They are not chasing battleships that can outrun them or crush them with escorts. They are hunting the ships that cannot fight back. In the beginning, Japanese naval doctrine treats merchant shipping as background noise. The fleet is the blade. The merchant marine is the sheath. Useful, replaceable, unglamorous. Protection exists, yes, but not obsession. Not with the same passion reserved for battleships and carriers. So early convoys sail thin-skinned, a single destroyer here, a patrol craft there, a few aging escorts with tired engines and crews trained more for surface action than for a shadow war beneath the waves. And the Americans are learning fast. At Pearl Harbor and Manila and Brisbane, submarine crews study Japanese routes like gamblers memorizing a deck. They learn where tankers must pass, where coal ships hug the coast, where maris funnel through narrow straits. They listen to radio chatter. They watch the horizon through periscopes that slice the world into a thin green circle. Their torpedoes, in those first months, are unreliable. Some hit and do not explode. Others run too deep. Captains curse and pound bulkheads, returning to port with bitter faces. Japanese officers hear of duds and laugh, because the enemy seems clumsy, because the empire has struck so hard and so quickly that American resistance appears disorganized. But then, slowly, the laughter dries up. The Vice Admiral flips to another page in the folder and sees a list of sinkings by month. A creeping incline, a steady increase, not spectacular enough to make headlines, not dramatic enough to stop a parade, but each line is a ship. Each ship is fuel that does not reach Truk, rice that does not reach Rabaul, aircraft parts that do not reach the Philippines, ammunition that does not reach Guadalcanal. And suddenly, the war looks less like a duel and more like a starving animal forced into a corner. In spring 1942, a conference is held in a room with maps pinned to cork boards. Red and blue strings mark routes. Officers argue about priorities. Some speak in the old language of battle. Others, younger, with the smell of modern war in their voices, point at the strings and say the word that no one wants to say. Convoys. Convoys mean escorts. Escorts mean ships taken away from fleet duties. Convoys mean drilling crews in anti-submarine warfare, in sonar, in depth charge tactics. Convoys mean admitting that a submarine can be as decisive as a battleship. And that admission tastes like defeat. One staff officer, a commander with sharp cheekbones, dares to speak plainly. He taps the map where routes converge near the home islands. If the Americans focus on tankers, he says, the fleet will not sail. Silence follows, because everyone understands the implication. A battleship without fuel is not a weapon. It is a floating shrine. In a dockyard, workers may build Yamato's armor thicker than any shell. They may mount guns that can throw steel farther than any enemy cannon. But none of that matters if the oil from the south never arrives. The Vice Admiral imagines the fleet anchored, proud and useless, while the nation grows hungry. He closes the folder slowly. Outside, in the Pacific, Sato and survivors like him sit in temporary barracks, wrapped in blankets, staring at nothing. Their ship is gone. Their cargo is gone. Their sense of the sea has changed forever. And on an American submarine somewhere beyond the horizon, a captain writes in a patrol log by red light, calm hand moving across paper, one Maru sunk. Cargo believed fuel and provisions. The ink dries. The war continues. The Vice Admiral does not sleep well after that meeting. In the dark, he hears imagined sounds, a distant churning of screws, the hollow thud of depth charges, the the sudden crack of steel rupturing below the waterline. These are not sounds an admiral is supposed to fear. His world is charts, tonnage tables, fleet dispositions. Yet the submarine has crawled into his mind like damp cold. In the spring of 1942, the Japanese fleet still believes in the great clash to come. The carrier victories of the previous months have fed that belief. The battleship is still treated like a sacred pillar, even as aircraft begin to prove they can shatter pillars. But supply is a quieter kind of truth. At Truck Lagoon, the Empire's forward anchorage, oil slicks shimmer on calm water around warships that look like dark islands. Destroyers come and go, escorting and screening. Pilots laugh in mess halls. Signals officers smoke and listen to radios. On paper, everything is still moving. Then the first real shortages begin to whisper. A tanker that should have arrived does not. Then another. Fuel allocations are adjusted. Training runs are shortened. Captains are told to conserve. The orders are phrased politely, as if this is merely prudence, not the first hint of a noose tightening. Far to the south, Japanese oil is not actually Japanese at all. It is seized oil. The Empire drinks from conquered wells in the Dutch East Indies. The fuel must travel north in vulnerable ships, across long sea lanes that cannot be armored, cannot be reinforced with pride, cannot be defended everywhere at once. And this is exactly where American submarines are beginning to aim. At Pearl Harbor and Fremantle and Brisbane, captains stand over tables with route maps and intelligence summaries. In the beginning, they wanted warships, because warships are what you imagine when you imagine victory. But submarine doctrine, in the harsh mathematics of war, pushed them toward a different prey. Merchant hulls are huge and slow. They cannot zigzag forever. They cannot outrun a torpedo. And every one of them carries the oxygen of the Japanese war machine. So the American boats wait. A submarine lies at periscope depth at dusk, its hull trembling faintly with the hum of machinery. Inside, the air is thick with diesel, sweat, coffee, and the sour tang of unwashed bodies. Men speak in whispers. The captain, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep, peers through the scope at a horizon painted purple and black. Then the silhouettes appear, a line of ships, running dark, smoke trailing low. Somewhere among them, if luck is good, is a tanker, its deck crowded with pipes and vents, its holds filled with oil that could launch 1,000 sorties. The captain orders a tracking course. The submarine closes like a shark. But even the shark has teeth that do not always bite. In 1942, the American torpedo is a problem nobody wants to admit is real. Shots that should kill do not. A captain lines up a perfect angle, fires, watches the wake streak toward the target, then sees nothing but a harmless splash as the torpedo detonates early or fails entirely. Sometimes it hits the hull with a muffled clunk and sinks inertly into the sea. In the control room, men clench fists. Someone swears. The captain's jaw locks so hard it seems it might crack. They have risked their boat in shallow water, under escorts, under aircraft, and the weapon has betrayed them. Japanese escorts, still learning, still imperfect. Sometimes drop depth charges wildly without a real contact. The submarine slips away, battered but alive, and the convoy survives. For a while, Japanese officers take this as evidence that the submarine threat is exaggerated. But the American captains keep returning, and they keep complaining, and they keep filing reports. And eventually, the torpedo problem begins to get fixed, not all at once, not cleanly, but enough. When the torpedoes begin to work, the sea changes character. The next convoy does not get a warning clunk. It gets a sharp internal blast that folds steel like paper. A tanker ignites, flames rolling across the surface, a moving sunrise that can be seen for miles. A freighter loses its bow and sinks with its stern still turning, screws spinning uselessly as if trying to outrun gravity. Japanese sailors begin to call the sea itself treacherous, as if the ocean has turned against them. But it is not the sea. It is the unseen hunter beneath it. By late 1942, the effect is no longer a string of isolated tragedies. It is a pattern. Ships are delayed. Cargo is lost. Whole convoys arrive light, missing one or two hulls that should have been there. The Navy begins to demand more escorts. The Army demands more shipping for its garrisons. The ministries argue over allocations as if they can negotiate with physics. A destroyer commander, worn and furious, writes to superiors that he cannot be everywhere, that he cannot chase ghosts indefinitely. Sonar contacts vanish. Escorts burn fuel hunting phantoms. The submarine attacks come at night, at dawn, in rain squalls, in the choking haze of tropical heat. The Japanese begin to adjust, but adjustments cost time, training, steel, and above all, attention. Attention is what the Navy would rather spend on the next fleet battle. In 1943, at a naval base near Yokosuka, an anti-submarine school drills young officers. They practice sonar interpretation, learn the rhythms of screw beats, the way a submarine's propellers sound different from a merchantman's. They learn depth charge patterns, the importance of coordinated attacks, the need for escort discipline. But much of the escort force is old, under-equipped and stretched thin. Japan has destroyers. Yes, but destroyers are also needed as fleet screens. Smaller escort ships exist, but too few, and many lack the best sonar, the best radar, the best training. The Americans, meanwhile, are building submarines in numbers Japan cannot match in escorts, and they are getting better. Submarines begin to station themselves near choke points like wolves at a gorge, in the Luzon Strait, in the waters off Formosa, along the approaches to the home islands. They learn to coordinate, to share contacts, to hand off targets. They patrol the routes that tankers must travel, the routes that coal ships must travel, the routes that food must travel. This is no longer a war of ship against ship. It is a war of appetite. In Tokyo, the Vice Admiral now receives fuel reports with a sinking feeling. He sees the same phrase appear again and again, written with the cautious language of bureaucracy. Deliveries below expectation. Consumption exceeds allocation. Training to be reduced. He imagines the fleet in harbor, magnificent and idle. He imagines pilots who cannot fly enough hours to stay sharp. He imagines destroyers rationing speed. He imagines battleships with empty bunkers, their great guns silent not because of enemy shells, but because of missing oil. And he realizes something that would have been heresy at the war's beginning. The American submarines are not trying to win glory. They are trying to win time. They are trying to win by removing the ability to fight at all. When the admirals had feared battleships, they feared a sudden decisive blow, the kind of blow you could at least prepare for with your own big ships. But a submarine war is a slow tightening around the throat. There is no single day to win, no single battle to reverse it, only more sinkings, more shortages, more rationing, more desperation. The Vice Admiral stares at a map of the Empire's sea lanes and feels his stomach go cold. A battleship can sink a ship. A submarine can sink a schedule. And when schedules collapse, empires collapse with them. The shortages stop whispering and start shouting in 1944. February 16th, 1944. Truk Lagoon. The morning air is bright and tropical. The water inside the atoll unnaturally calm, as if the Pacific is holding its breath. Warships sit at anchor in neat arrogance, their masts and signal yards cutting thin lines against a blue sky. Fuel barges idle. Small boats zip between hulls. The lagoon looks like a fortress built out of steel. Then the sky cracks open. American carrier aircraft come in low. Engines howling, sunlight flashing on wings. Bombs fall in clean arcs. Torpedoes skim the surface and bite into anchored ships that cannot run. Smoke columns rise like black trees. Oil spreads in rainbow sheets that burn when flames catch. For the Japanese watching, it is a nightmare of motion and helplessness. And yet, even as truck burns, the deeper wound is not the warship struck in the lagoon. It is the fear that follows the raid like a shadow. If the Americans can hit Truk, then no anchor is truly safe. And if no anchor is safe, then the supply chain has nowhere to rest. Across the empire, the merchant fleet is now sailing in a world that feels hostile by default. Convoys are larger and more frequent, but the escorts are still too few, too strained, too often poorly equipped. A destroyer's captain might have to protect 10 cargo ships with one hull and a handful of depth charges. Patrol aircraft are scarce. Radar coverage is uneven, and the Americans have learned how to exploit every weakness. In a narrow strait south of Japan, a convoy pushes north under a low ceiling of cloud. The escorts zigzag, listening, sonar crews sweating over headphones as they try to turn static and ocean noise into meaning. On the merchant ships, the crews are tired men now. Veterans of fear, eyes always scanning for a periscope feather or the white scar of a torpedo wake. No one sings. No one jokes about the Americans anymore. On one of the escorts, an ensign stands near the bridge, watching the sea. He was taught to fear battleships, taught that the enemy's heavy guns would decide his fate. But he has never seen an American battleship. He has seen something worse. He has seen a tanker burning from stem to stern, flames so high they turned night into day. He has seen men in the water, shouting for help, and he has had to keep moving because stopping would kill them all. He has seen the sea erupt with depth charge blasts and then go quiet again, as if nothing happened, as if the enemy simply chose to remain invisible. And he has seen the numbers. By 1944, the numbers are becoming impossible to ignore. The loss rate is not simply damaging. It is catastrophic. It shows up in places that have nothing to do with the sea. It shows up in airfields where planes sit grounded. It shows up in factory schedules. It shows up in kitchens where ration bowls grow smaller. It shows up in warships that cannot train. At Kura, a battleship sits in harbor with tugboats nudging her into position. Her paint is fresh. Her guns are massive, calm, silent. She looks like power made physical, but inside the Admiralty offices, there are discussions that would have been unthinkable before. Fuel is being saved for decisive operations only. Training sorties are cut. Destroyer patrols are shortened. A battleship commander reads his orders and feels humiliation like heat under the skin. A battle line is supposed to roam, to threaten, to impose. Instead, it is being treated like a precious artifact to be kept on a shelf until the perfect moment. Perfect moments do not exist when you are starving. In the convoy war, the Americans are not merely sinking ships. They are ripping holes in the rhythm of Japanese logistics. A tanker that was supposed to arrive on Monday does not arrive at all. A replacement tanker is delayed, rerouted, forced to hug coasts, forced to slow down, forced into predictable lanes. Predictability is death. American submarines now patrol like confident predators. They slip in at night, surface to charge batteries, then dive again before dawn. Their radar helps them find targets in darkness and bad weather. Their crews are seasoned, their captains aggressive, their torpedoes far more dependable than in 1942. They are not hunting for glory. They are hunting for collapse. A Japanese convoy commander stands over a chart and sees that his route options are shrinking. Go east and the submarines wait. Go west and the mines wait. Hug the coast and aircraft can attack. Steam fast and you burn fuel you cannot spare. Steam slow and you become easier to intercept. There is no good answer. Aboard one Maru, the radio crackles with warnings about submarine sightings. The merchant captain orders more zigzagging. The ship sways like a drunk, cargo shifting, Men curse as crates slide, as ropes snap, as the deck becomes a chaos of shifting mass. The zigzag is meant to save them, but it also slows them, stretches the voyage, increases the time they are exposed. Time is what submarines feed on. In mid-1944, the shortage of fuel begins to directly cripple the Navy's ability to respond to American advances. Not because the Japanese lack courage or ships or plans, but because the plans require movement. Movement requires oil. Oil requires tankers. Tankers require sea lanes. And the sea lanes are being watched through American periscopes. There is a moment, late summer 1944, when an admiral looks at a fuel allocation sheet and realizes that the Empire's war has become a ledger problem. He stares at the neat columns of numbers and feels something like nausea. All of this, he thinks. All these ships, all these guns, all these lives. And it can be undone by sinking the ships that carry barrels. He thinks of the battleship, of the traditional enemy, of the idea that the war would be decided by who could bring the biggest guns to bear. And he understands the bitter truth. A battleship can destroy ships that are built to fight. A submarine destroys ships that are built to sustain. And in 1944, sustainment is everything. On a gray morning off the coast of Luzon, an American submarine captain watches a convoy through his periscope. He sees a tanker in the line, fat and slow, escorted by a destroyer that looks alert but tired. The captain raises a hand, and the fire control party murmurs data, range, bearing, speed, angle on the bow. Torpedo doors open with a metallic clack. The captain's voice is calm, almost gentle. Fire. The boat shudders as torpedoes leave the tubes. Compressed air hissing. In the periscope, white wakes race toward the convoy. The Japanese ships begin to turn. Too late. Heavy. Trapped by their own momentum. A bright bloom of fire leaps from the tanker's side. Then another. The tanker begins to burn and the sea around it turns to flame. Fuel spilling and igniting. A blazing lake that cannot be put out. The American captain lowers the periscope, already listening for the escorts, already preparing to dive deep, already moving on to the next target. And in Tokyo, far from the smell of burning oil, the admirals begin to fear the submarine more than any battleship, not because it is braver or stronger, but because it is patient, because it attacks the empire where armor cannot help, because it is turning Japan's ocean into a strangling cord. The fire on the tanker does not die quickly. It crawls across the surface, a wide orange wound, and the smoke column climbs until it smears into cloud like a bruise. The escorting destroyer circles the inferno, caught between instinct and reality. Men on her deck lean out, shouting, throwing lines, trying to pull survivors from water that is literally burning. But the water is the enemy now. A sailor reaches down with a boat hook, and the heat drives him back. Another tries to lower a boat, and the flames lick at the hull before it even touches the surface. The destroyer's captain orders her away, not because he does not care, but because he has learned the cruel arithmetic of this war. Stop, and you become a stationary target. Stop, and the unseen boat below will line up another shot. So the destroyer retreats, and the screams behind her fade into the roar of the fire. This is what American submarines have done to the Japanese Navy by 1944. Not only sink ships, but force choices that rot the soul. Every escort commander becomes a man who must decide which lives to abandon so that the rest might live a little longer. Every merchant captain becomes a man sailing a coffin that might explode without warning. And above all, every Japanese admiral becomes a man staring at a map and realizing his fleet has been reduced to a symbol. At Kura and Sasebo and Yokosuka, the great warships sit in harbor, their silhouettes familiar, comforting, and infuriating. Their hulls are still intact, their guns still point outward like a promise, but the fuel bunkers are not full. The fuel barges that should be arriving are not arriving. The tankers that should be unloading are ash and twisted metal on the seafloor. In staff meetings, the language changes. Words like decisive battle remain, but they sound hollow. Officers begin to talk about conserving sorties, conserving steaming hours, conserving everything. The Navy that once trained to roam and strike now trains to stay alive. Pilots are told to fly fewer hours. Newer aviators never get enough time in the air to become truly sharp. Maintenance crews strip parts from grounded aircraft to keep a handful operational. And in the engine rooms of destroyers, men count fuel like a miser counts coins. The sea lanes that fed the empire are now bleeding out. In 1941, Japan could seize oil and resources and assume they would keep flowing. In 1944, the flow is being throttled. Tankers are the most valuable ships in the empire, and also the most vulnerable. Coal shipments fall. Oil shipments fall harder. Food shipments begin to shrink as merchant hulls vanish. The result is felt first in the far outposts. On an island garrison in the Central Pacific, an army captain opens a supply crate that arrives late. Inside are a few sacks of rice, some canned fish, and ammunition that does not match half his rifles. The men look at him with quiet eyes, waiting for reassurance. He has none. The radio speaks of glorious resistance. The reality is hunger. Rations are cut, then cut again. The captain watches his soldiers grow thin, their cheekbones rising like sharp stones under skin. Fever spreads. Malaria takes men who would have fought well. There is no medicine shipment. There is no fresh food. The sea around them is full of American submarines, and every transport sent to them is a gamble that becomes less likely to pay off. Meanwhile, at home, the shortages creep into daily life. In Osaka, a factory foreman stands by a line of machines that should be humming with war production. The machines are silent, not because the workers are gone, but because the raw materials are late. The steel, the rubber, the fuel, all delayed, all reduced. He stares at the empty floor space and feels his stomach knot. War, he realizes, is not just fought at the front. It is fought in warehouses, in shipping manifests, in the gap between what is needed and what arrives. In Tokyo, a mother stands in a ration line, holding a small bowl, her child tugging her sleeve and asking for more. She has no answer that will make sense. She can only look away and pretend the question did not hurt. The admirals know about these lines, even if they do not speak of them. They read the same economic reports. They hear the same internal warnings. They see the same charts showing a merchant fleet shrinking month by month. In one meeting, an officer dares to say it out loud. "If the shipping losses continue," he says, "we will be unable to feed the cities." No one argues. There is only a long silence and the faint scratch of a pen as someone writes a note that will be buried in a file. Because what can you do with that truth? You cannot order a battleship to escort every Maru. You cannot conjure thousands of escorts overnight. You cannot train sonar crews instantly. You cannot build merchant hulls faster than they are being sunk. And the enemy submarines are everywhere, and they are choosing their targets with cold logic. They are not aiming at the fleet to win a duel. They are aiming at the economy to win the war. A Japanese rear admiral, hair thinning, face drawn, stands alone on a pier at dusk watching a destroyer depart. The ship's wake spreads and then vanishes into dark water. The admiral knows that destroyer might never return, not because an American battleship will fight it, because a submarine might be waiting and one torpedo could erase it. And yet even if the destroyer survives, what is it protecting? A convoy, perhaps, that carries fuel that might not arrive, food that might not arrive, ammunition that might not arrive. The admiral hears the echo of older doctrine in his mind. The decisive battle, the big guns, the heroic clash. But the war has changed shape around him. It has become a long siege with the ocean as the wall and submarines as the knives slipping through cracks. This is why Japanese admirals feared American submarines more than battleships. Not because submarines were more powerful in steel or speed. Because submarines attacked certainty. They made every voyage a question mark. They made every fuel calculation a gamble. They made every fleet plan depend on ships that might never reach port. And in 1944, as the merchant fleet collapses and the flow of oil and food weakens, the Japanese Navy begins to look at its proud battle line and see a terrible irony. The battleships are still there, but the empire that built them is running out of what keeps them alive. The rear admiral remains on the pier until the destroyer's stern light is swallowed by distance. Only then does he turn away, hands clasped behind his back, moving with the stiff posture of a man who cannot afford to look defeated in public. But defeat is in the air now, even if no one says the word. In a conference room with paper walls and maps pinned like wounds to boards, officers speak in low voices about operations, about contingencies, about sacrifices. The fleet is still expected to fight. It will fight, because that is what it was built to do. Yet every plan begins with the same question. How much fuel do we have? Not how many guns. Not how many shells. Not how many battleships. Fuel, the answer, is never enough. Somewhere in those meetings, the ghost of the old Navy still insists that one great battle will fix everything. That if the American fleet can be damaged, the enemy will negotiate. The blockade will ease. The shipping lanes will recover. The belief is stubborn because it is comforting, because it gives the suffering a shape that can be imagined and controlled. But the submarine war does not respect imagination. It respects only tonnage and time. The American submarines have turned the Pacific into a ledger where every sunk ship subtracts a future that cannot be replaced. They have made the sea itself a weapon, a vast hunting ground where Japan must move slowly, cautiously, predictably, while the hunter moves unseen. A battleship can be challenged by another battleship. A fleet can be met by a fleet. There is pride in that, even fear. But it is a fear with a face. A submarine offers no face. It offers a wake that appears too late. It offers an explosion under the waterline that no armor belt was designed to stop. It offers a war that is fought in darkness and numbers, in missing cargo and delayed arrivals, in ration lines and grounded aircraft. Late 1944 bleeds into 1945 with the taste of scarcity everywhere. At a naval air station, a young pilot sits on an empty ammunition crate, helmet in his lap, staring at a runway where fewer planes take off each week. The mechanics can keep a few engines running, but the fuel drums are locked, guarded, measured. Training flights are rare. Combat flights are rationed like food. The pilot listens as an instructor tells him to conserve, to pick shots carefully, to return if the engine sputters. It is good advice, but it feels like learning to swim while someone drains the pool. At a shipyard, workers hammer plates onto a new escort vessel, smaller than a destroyer. Simpler, meant for one purpose, to hunt submarines. But even as they build, they know the escorts are coming too late, too few. Every month the Americans put more submarines to sea. Every month the merchant fleet shrinks further. In the home islands, the effects are no longer theoretical. Coal shortages mean factories slow. Food shortages mean hunger spreads beyond the military outposts and into civilian neighborhoods. People talk quietly in kitchens, voices low, as if even walls might report them. In the Navy, the shame becomes a private poison. They have battleships that can shatter anything in a surface duel. They have cruisers and destroyers with crews who will die at their posts without hesitation. They have courage, training, tradition, but tradition cannot escort a tanker through a narrow strait at night. Courage cannot turn a torpedo into a dud, and training cannot create fuel from an empty sea. When the fleet finally sorties for major operations, it does so like a man spending his last coins, knowing there will be no payday. The warships steam out, their wakes white against dark water, their signal flags snapping, their crews at stations, on decks, sailors grip rails and stare ahead, faces hard. The ships look magnificent. They look like the old dream of decisive battle made real. Yet beneath that magnificence is a brittle truth. They cannot do this often. They cannot keep this up. Because the tankers behind them are not there. Because the merchant lifeline has been cut so deeply that even victories at sea would not refill the holds or restock the ports quickly enough. And in that truth is the final reason the Japanese admirals feared American submarines more than battleships. A battleship threat is dramatic, but limited. A battleship can destroy a few ships in a day. It can win a battle and then sail away. It is terrifying, but it is episodic. It does not, by itself, change the daily bloodstream of an economy. A submarine campaign does. It can destroy the slow ships that carry the war itself. It can force the enemy to disperse escorts, to divert destroyers, to burn scarce fuel hunting contacts that vanish. It can deny training. It can deny food. It can deny oil. It can make an empire fight while starving. And it does all this without demanding a single grand showdown. Imagine being a Japanese admiral in 1944 and 1945. You have been trained to win with decisive battle, to think in lines and salvos and honor. Yet you are watching the war be decided by ships you do not command, ships you cannot fully protect, ships that were never meant to be heroes. You can plan the next fleet sortie to perfection and still lose because the tankers were sunk last month. You can build the biggest guns in the world and still have them silent because the fuel did not arrive. You can prepare for battleships and carriers and still be undone by a steel cylinder in the dark. A crew of 70 men and a handful of torpedoes aimed at the right target. In the end, the strangling is what breaks you, not one catastrophic blow. Not one day of thunder, but a long series of invisible cuts that bleed the economy dry until the war effort collapses under its own weight. That is why Japanese admirals feared the submarine more than the battleship. Because battleships could take ships. Submarines took the ability to fight. And once that ability was gone, all the armor and all the guns in the world were just steel waiting for an end.